We're talking about moisture management in healthy soil.
Can we clap now? Not sure that was deserved until later. We'll see whether that was deserved or not. All right. There we go. Okay, I do a lot of EM mapping, and that's the main part of my presentation. Kylan's going to come in and talk a lot more on the precision, where we go with variable rate irrigation, variable rate seeding rates, variable rate fertilizer, all those kind of things to help manage a farming environment to try and get more out of the land without leaching nitrates, using up so much water, those kind of things. It's basically a conservation program. As far as mapping, how many of you have ever been around or heard of EM mapping, EC mapping, those kind of things? Okay, so several of you know kind of what I'm doing here. It's basically measuring mine is an EM sled. It's the same thing, gives you the same information as an EC or a Varus machine. EM is just electrical magnetivity instead of electrical conductivity. That's the difference. But when I do a field, everything I do is with RTK. And Kylan will explain a little bit more on that. One of the reasons we do it, it's not so that on a four-wheeler I get that exact perfect line and I'm not off 2 inches, because I don't know how many have driven a four-wheeler with a GPS unit on it, but it's very difficult to stay on that line. So that's not the purpose of us using RTK. It's so that we get the elevation changes. So when we start doing variable rate irrigation, you can get the difference in your slopes on your soils. And you know the amount of slope and the elevation and all those things is why we're using RTK. So I do that with every map, every field that I do. This is my sled and my four-wheeler. The dual EM unit is in the sled. It's a fairly simple setup. I've got a CFX 750, which is just a normal Trimble monitor. A lot of guys have in sprayers. That's what I'm getting the RTK Elevation with. And I've got a Yuma computer on the other side. It's the yellow part behind the handlebars. You can't hardly see it. But anyway, it's a Yuma computer, and that's collecting all the GPS data and the dual EM information all at the same time. This right here is one of our EC maps that we have done in a field, and this is a raster file which shows you the degree of accuracy that we have. This is telling you the difference in the soils in the field. The reds and yellows will tend to be more of the sandier soils, less water holding capacity. Blues and the greens are the heavier soils. And there again, Kylan's going to touch a lot more on that, but that's just a quick example of kind of what we've done. Once you map a field, and this can be done either dryland irrigated, it's all the same principle that goes behind it, but once you map a field, then you can break it into different management zones. Now what we're trying to do here is a lot of guys are talking, oh now the name escapes me, grid sampling. A lot of you have heard of grid sampling. Now, there's nothing wrong with grid sampling, it's a good practice. But from the cost side to the farmer, if you're gridding a field some places I know they do it on every 2 acres. If you're pulling a sample on every 2 acres and paying for that out of 160 acres, you got to pay for 80 soil samples. And the intensity of the time that it takes to get all that collected gets to be a little overwhelming, especially in eastern Colorado at 50 bushel dryland. It gets a little hard to do. If you can break a field into 4 management zones based on your difference in soils, now you can start to take 4 soil samples and just collect it out of each one of those zones, put it in a bucket, mix it together, and get a pretty good idea that in the yellow areas I want to shoot for a particular target goal as far as overall yield, and then a different one in the reds. On this particular map, if you remember the last map, let me back up here, you can see the reds and the yellows versus the blues and the greens. Well, when we did this particular map to come up with these, we split it right on the line. Basically, we took the whole field and came up with your average, and then you've got the light green here and the blues are above that line, and the yellows and the reds are below that line. So it's basically coming exactly from that other map. So that's just one of the things you can do with an EC map. If you know your fields and you want to start looking at some variable rate, this will help you split up a field to kind of get an idea where to start from and what we can do. This is an example of some EC maps that we have done. They did the exact same field 4 different times over a span of 10 years. You can see it was 97 and 98, and then they did 2005 and 2007. I did not run it. I didn't have my sled at this time, but this is the data they had. What I want you to get from this is all of those are very similar. If you look at the changes in the soil types, very, very similar, and that's where we're saying over the course of time, you shouldn't need to remap a field. Okay? Yes.
What kind of management was that? Was that till, no-till system? What was it?
I don't know either. I don't know. And listening to what you had to present, I don't know how much difference you would make in a field if you started changing the biology of the soil. And I don't know if anything has been done that way or not.
We've done it with aerial. Have you seen those infrared?
Oh yeah.
Where you can see the maps and you can see mapping with different greenness that comes out in red.
Right.
Well, where we did no-till conventional and no-till with covers, the no-till with covers were consistently darker green.
Okay, but did they still contain the variation? Is what I
know. No, there was no. Well, from the map, that's what I'm saying.
That was just measuring. Yeah, you're just measuring the.
Yeah, we're just measuring the top
canopy,
right. See, which it reflects certain spectrum of the light.
Right.
But see, with conventional, it was spotty.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah,
see what's happening is the nutrient cycle, when you destroy the soil like that, it's not consistent. You don't have the soil intact, and it shows in the nutrient cycle.
Sure.
So it was able to reflect that stuff.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it would be interesting to do something.
Terry, those darker areas, with there more clay in there, or do you know?
Higher clay in the darker areas and not so much in the lighter areas.
And that's pretty much in then the depth of topsoil. There's kind of the things it tells.
Is this deep?
This is actually a deep subsoil.
This is a deep subsoil that's go down 3 feet.
So your machine has the ability to go down 3 feet.
Yep. It'll measure a topsoil, which is down to 1 feet, and it'll measure a deep soil down to 3 feet. We get them both.
So how does it respond to, like, how does the map show when you have soils that are high in organic matter?
The organic matter, this is measuring that, it's more of a measure of the textural changes in the soil particles. So I've seen a little bit of adjustment in high or organic matter fields, but not. If it's been consistently farmed a specific way over a long period of time, we're getting a little bit.
Okay, yes.
So, but I'm hoping people start adapting to yours and change that. Maybe need to map in about 10 years ago.
That'd be good.
That's what
Yeah, because I think it's got a lot of potential.
No, but there is.
You can show, especially your technology, can say, hey, look, if you go to this kind of system, look at the difference. You can see some of that.
And I would like to do some of that. You know, really, if we had a field that had been done for a period of time, one that we did beforehand and afterwards, see if we're starting to make some changes in EC readings where we can, tell if there's going to be a major difference in the soil type. Right now, this is more of just conventional and no-till type farming, the majority that's out there. I hope in a few years that changes. But you can see that for now, the general idea is over time you shouldn't have to resample or remap a field unless you really make a major change in your farming operation. Or I know of a few places where guys don't like the slopes in their fields, or they have that real sandy bottom that runs through the middle of a pivot, and they might bulldoze the top of a hill off and try to even some of that out. Now then you've changed the soil type and the soil structure at that point, remapping so that you know where your different areas are. If you're going to start doing some variable rate or different management zones, you're going to need to resample that. But this is kind of just a brief little summary of what I do in the mapping process. I always set up a boundary. That's just the way the equipment works. I run everything at 12 to 15 miles an hour in eastern Colorado. I guess most of the time I do that. I've had a few fields where you definitely have to slow down to that 8, 9, 10 mile an hour. Most of those have been farmed and they got boulders out there and you're trying, so it doesn't work very good. But for the most part, on a irrigated corn, going in right afterwards or something, I'm running about 12 to 15 mile an hour. I'm running every 70 feet is where we're collecting the data. I need moisture down to that 3 foot depth. Not wet, Scott, but it's got to be wet enough to get a good reading. Last fall, I was not able to run a field. In fact, I did a few and they finally just shut me off and said, your data's no good, we're going to have to redo the field. So the moisture is very important to get that EM reading. If you have like an irrigated pivot in the center, and then you got dryland corners on the sides, you don't want to map all of that as one big field, because when you're done, your corners are going to turn up bright red and you're going to have all your colors within your circle. Because of the difference in the way they're farmed, the difference in the moisture content of the soil. So that's one thing to watch out for. You cannot run on frozen ground, and I know that there's several people out there that have done that, and it does not work very good. Your data you can't process it right, it doesn't make sense. So frozen ground is definitely something you don't do. It's got to be relatively smooth. I mentioned the ones that have been farmed. I have done a few fields that have been summer fallowed. It's very difficult. Very, very difficult. And really, from your perspective, if you've got a field that's farmed that somebody's wanting to get mapped, you're not going to get as good of a map because of the bounce in the machine. It just absolutely isn't as good. The best thing is to call and get it done right before you go in and work it, if that's something that you're after.
So Terry, is the science changing on your particular instrument? Is it getting better? Are they using different mathematical models, using fractals and stuff like that?
Not necessarily.
We're not using fractal yet?
I'm not to my knowledge.
No.
Because
I do run on some strip till ground. If it's been strip tilled, it's nice if you're going to strip till it in the fall, if it's set until spring and you get the moisture and it all evens out, it's probably better. I did one this fall that actually the strip tiller just pulled out of as I was pulling in. So I'm kind of anxious to get those results back and see. I don't expect there to be any problems, but it's something I kind of did, taking a chance on, and decided I'd rerun it if I needed to, but I wanted to see what it would do. Things you can do on the maps, we've already gone over some of this. You can vary the number of management zones. Our example had 4. You can drop it to 3. You can go up from that. The thing you got to really watch is in a field, you don't want to get too many management zones. Too many is just too many to get your head around and be able to really figure out what you're doing. If you're going to go to too many management zones, then you probably need to just grid sample and then break it out that way. Well, that defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do. You can use this as a guide for your soil sampling. Pull the cores out of each zone and mix them together. That way you're only getting the 4 samples or so, kind of to save expense, but still be reasonable on the field and get a good reading for what you need. Then use the soil sample data, and then we can export any of the prescriptions we would write for a variable rate seeding or variable rate fertilizer, and obviously for the variable rate irrigation. We can export any of those to fit any of the equipment. So if you wanted to go out and do variable rate seeding and you owned a John Deere tractor, yes, we can match up with that, or we can match up with a Trimble unit or any of those. I mean, they overlap very, very well. So, and then this is going right into precision water. I'm going to let Kylan take over on a lot of this. I do write a lot of the prescriptions and stuff, but Kylan works for Crop Metrics. And if I ever have a question, he's my first call. And he was willing to come down here today and help out with part of this presentation. So this is Kylan Hunt.
Question for both of you. So you guys haven't done different management schemes. So who's your people like conventional farmers ask for this most of the time? Do you have no-tillers too?
Oh yeah.
So, but you haven't have you seen any distinction between those type of systems with your map?
With the maps?
Yeah, because you can have some farms close by that have the same soil types. It'd be interesting to find out if you've seen any differences.
Yeah. Where we're measuring the actual soil particle itself, they're measuring that conductivity that's pulling that electrical current through there.
Yeah, but see,
The only place I've seen it really bad is under heavy compaction.
See, the thing is, when you coat those particles, the organomineral complexes, it changes everything. That's what I'm saying.
That's what Terry and I were talking about that.
Yeah, see, because
And
it
we've got,
changes everything.
we've got a handful of guys that are starting to change from the conventional till to at least a strip till approach. And I'm gonna ask a few of them if we can remap this field in about 5 years. And start looking and seeing what we can
I'd like
do.
to
Currently, until we know that that has happened, we can't remap and find out anything too soon. We wanna give them enough time to start making some actual changes in the composition of that soil. Then we'll remap it. That's gonna be interesting.
And see, I just want you to keep this in mind so you think about when you do this. Especially if it's farmer strip tillers that are willing to use covers. See, just go to no-till is not enough, or strip till. Got to use the covers so you can really build that fast.
And I ran across one field this year, south of Burlington, that was planted to a cover crop. What all it contained, I don't know for sure, but it was a multi-seed cover crop, and it was about that high when I was going across it. It was beautiful. It looked nice. Problem is, I didn't have a map before he planted that. But what I wanted to know, this is the first time he's ever done it. And I wanted to know if I map that again in 4 years, if he continues to do cover crops on that. He had it in wheat stubble, and they planted the cover crop as soon as the wheat come off, and it was growing, and I did it a month and a half ago, probably. Had good cover, everything really, I mean, it was nice. It was a neat setup.
This would make a good CIG group, boys. It's money.
It's just, yeah, it's one of them things that if I know on that field, if you don't, I mean, I don't think planting the cover crop the first time is gonna change much in the way of the soil.
You
I'm
would
thinking
change.
we need to remap that particular field in 5 years and find out if we can get a change.
That'd be good. Thank you.
How much time do we have? Where are we? I'll try to rush through this.
310.
3:10? All right, Ray's got me on board.
Half an hour.
All right, couple of things first, guys. I have to applaud Ray for what he was talking about. I'm a huge advocate of that. Because I work in the world of water, one of the biggest challenges that I have in Nebraska is runoff. And when you're under water allocation and you have runoff, those two do not mix. Okay? Runoff and allocation do not mix. That's one of the biggest challenges. And this is the approach that I take when I talk to growers about that process. You go out here and you look across the landscape, where can you go and get the highest infiltration rate of water? Pasture. You get to 4-inch rain, and you get a 4-inch rain in an hour, what's going to absorb more water, your conventional tilled field or that pasture? What's going to have the least amount of, washouts in it? The pasture. Absolutely. So that's why if we start thinking about that a little bit, we can start changing the way we're treating our soils. That comes into play with crop metrics. Here's the approach that crop metrics takes right out of the gate, guys. Good data, good results. We are a precision ag company. That's what we do. We are a precision ag company with a high emphasis on water. The only company that I know of in the United States right now that's putting the emphasis on water like we do. I mean, nobody else is doing that. Everybody's either touching on fertilizer, or they're touching on water, or they're touching on seeding, but they're not putting the three together. Think about that. What's the requirements of life? I don't care if it's human life or plant life. You've got seed, you've got food, you've got water. And when those three are working together, you have a healthy life. Okay? Healthy life brings healthy results and positive results. That's what we look at in crop metrics, guys. We want to find data that is good. And that's where, right out of the gate, we do map our fields with soil EC, electrical conductivity. I'll tell you why here in a minute. We combine that with RTK elevation data. It is a must for us. It is a requirement to get started with us. Here's a couple of reasons why. The accuracy of an EC map. These happen to be some no-till fields up in South Dakota. There's 6 fields. They were mapped separately, but look at the consistency of the underground soil texture structures in that field. The soil textural changes are consistent from one field to the next. Why? I call that a God-placed variable. I can't change it. It is set, it is fixed, it is set data that I cannot change. How important is that in the world of precision ag? How fast is technology changing around us? Faster than we can keep up with. If we can identify a variable out there that never changes, it is a huge benefit in the world of precision agriculture. We map this field and we overlay the soil surveys. Soil surveys maps help me a lot by helping me identify what kind of soils I'm working in. But the reality is when I need those textural changes, I can be more accurate with an EC map. But because I work in so many different regions of the country, I need to know what kind of soil I'm looking at. These red areas, they're just a lighter textured soil. That's all it is. The blue areas are heavier textured soil within that given region. Now, a lot of times the guys will ask me, what's the best soil in that field? I don't know. I cannot tell you. I've had certain guys tell me that this blue soil is your best soil. Not always the case, guys. It may be your most fertile soil. This is something Ray and I talked about here a couple weeks ago. That may have a lot more fertility in it, but it doesn't mean it's productive. It does not mean that's your best soil. That's very, very important.
Are you measuring salinity or texture?
Texture. Soil texture.
No, this is not
Very
EC, it's not electrical.
Okay, that's where I was getting confused, because I saw some numbers there that I thought was kind of really wild there.
It's
Okay.
different.
What does the EC
Soil
stand-
texture
What does the
change.
EC stand for then? What's the EC stand for?
It's electrical conductivity.
But it's not for
It's
salinity.
not for salinity.
Okay.
No.
I'm back.
Yeah. Well, when they say EC, they send it, to get these variations, they send an electrical current
Okay.
through
Well,
that
see,
soil.
salinity impacts EC.
Not necessarily,
You don't think so?
not in this case,
And why would you think that, Ray?
because it's an electric current, and I don't know, I don't understand it. But what EC that I would do in the laboratory measures ions,
Yes, ion
Well, see-
content.
and he's not measuring ions.
No,
Oh, but
we
don't
are
you?
not, we're not measuring any
Right,
ion content.
but I was thinking that electrical conductivity does affect electrical charge, even though it's an ion. The ion is-
Yeah, it affects it, that's on ions, but not however that electronic charge.
Okay, so so what you're saying is, when we get a soil sample from you, you do electrical conductivity, but you measure the ions and cations.
Right.
Okay.
I'm measuring the soluble things in the soil, the nitrate and the sulfate, calcium,
Here's the
magnesium.
question I asked you guys then. So when you get the measurements, you're bouncing off particles, are you not?
It's measuring through the particles.
It's
Because
measured
it's
through the...
sending that current in and pulling it back to that magnet. So it's measuring that conductivity. All we're doing is catching a time reading.
Well,
And you said so in that sled then as a magnet,
There's a
and
magnet.
so it sends a current out,
See, how
and that
could
pulls
you,
it back.
so how could you not affect positive cations in there if it's magnet and it's electrical charge? It had to be.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The one thing
I have
that-
more questions, I don't know.
It's not chemistry, I'll just say that, that's all I know.
Okay.
The one thing that I would say on that, and this is something that we've run into, these real dark blue spots oftentimes will have a real high CEC value, and they'll blow it off the chart. And what we have to do is take those areas basically and just take them out.
When you say,
The cation contents.
okay, is it because of salinity?
Possibly, and a lot of times it can be in
But-
some of those areas.
But the saline stuff will hold more water, and the clay holds more water, and it's kind of measuring the water content of the soil.
Yeah. Those areas, I've seen some, especially if there's been a high application of manure, say out in the feedlot area, sometimes those will be so far off the chart, they're unrealistic.
So it is measuring ions.
To
Yeah.
a certain extent, yes.
Yeah.
But it's not until we get to that. This is where it's interesting because one of our mappers was Midwest Independent Soil Samplers. They actually have one of their mappers that's doing a research test on this. He's getting his master's degree and all of his research is done on salt content with an EM sled.
See, because we would use, to remediate saline sodic soils, we would run ECs. So we would know electroconductivity, so we know how much we have to change it. So I would think that goes hand in hand.
See, we've tested where we're looking for the variation within that field in textural changes. You take Utah, for instance. We've done a lot of testing in Utah with the sleds, and we'll go pull a sled out there, and they do a lot of watering to drive the salt out of their fields because they have such a high content in salt. So we've mapped the field before and after. There's actually very little change in the conductivity of the soil texture. There's not a lot of change. So if we have that consistency across the whole field, we'll maintain that consistency, both before and after the watering to drive the salts out. But that's what we're looking for, is that consistency in those fields, that consistent change. And we're learning new stuff on it all the time. The guy that, the gentleman that owns Crop Metrics, he's become really, really sophisticated in EC. So I learn a lot from him all the time. If you really want to get deep, we'd have to bring him in and talk to him. Did you happen to meet him down at the meeting?
Is that Nick?
Yeah, Nick.
Had lunch with him.
Okay.
But we didn't talk about EC.
You should sometime. Here's the other thing, our RTK elevation data. Like Terry was saying, we don't gather RTK elevation data to get a straight line. Growers are doing that. They want that repeatability, especially on strip till. I want it for vertical. I want to know how high it is from that low point to that high point. This is a field I work with up in Broken Bow, Nebraska. This is all gravity ground or converted gravity ground over here. From the center point right there at that pivot to the top of that hill, 90 foot of elevation change. We water the top of this hill. We call that the mountain. This is all flat right here until you get to there. So you got 1, 2, 3 towers that are running down here. The rest of those towers go up 90 foot. You don't dump bales out on the side of that hill. They're going to the bottom. You better drive them to the bottom. We call it the mountain. Here's the reason, soil and landscape. When I said we map the fields every time, it's a must. Soil and landscape form a fixed foundational baseline. In the world of precision agriculture, if you're going to make changes every single year in your application rates of fertilizer and seed, we need to identify something that is fixed and never going to change so that we can go back and measure our rate changes to make sure that it worked. I do not do a seeding prescription or a fertilizer prescription without this, because otherwise I don't have anything to base it off of and gauge my success. Did it work? Did it not? I need a constant. Soil and topography become that constant, that God-placed variable that I can't change. This simply identifies that lighter textured soil from that heavier textured soil. And we start looking at that hilltop in the middle of this field. There's our hilltop, that's our low point, that's our high point. Is that important in irrigation? Yeah. Why? Think about it this way. That hilltop's about 16 foot higher than our mid-plane in that field. We get a 2-inch rain in 20 minutes. A lot different rainfall than a 2-inch rain in 2 hours. Okay? Where's that water going to go? That's what this map is for. A simple black and white map. I call it an aspect map. It simply shows us our differentiation between our north and south facing slopes. That's huge. I need to know if that water takes off running, where's it going to end up? The way that I run my pivot the next time I start it after that rainfall, what kind of a rainfall did I receive? What kind of how should I run my pivot the next go around? That's critical. This black line right here, that's my ridge top. So I can set my pivot prescriptions very precisely. We call them after rain events. All of my growers run an after rain event prescription based on the kind of rain that they receive.
So how much slope are you talking about? That looks pretty, that's a cool map, but how much gradient are you talking about? How much?
We've actually, from this point here, you follow that ridge, I've got 16% slope right through here. Yeah, has a 16% slope in there. The steepest place, the absolute steepest, is at 21%. It's a very small area. But here's the interesting thing. This right here, in fact, there's those slopes, those steep slopes right there. That's our yield map.
So that's the lowest yield right there?
That's the lowest yield. That's coming off
high
those
knobs
slopes.
right there?
Yep. This is our yield map coming off of this field of variation. This map is always going to change. It will always change. You will never get the same yield map twice. Even if you get the consistency in the areas of change, your extent of change is always different. Always. You'll never get the same map twice. That is important information. We're not going to go into the seeding. We're not going to go into fertilizer. If you want to talk about that, we do put those three together. What we're going to talk about today is the water. And the one thing that we've learned at Crop Metrics is the fact that if we can optimize water, we optimize all the other inputs. It's huge. This is some of the things that we take into account. We routinely measure soil water status to account for rainfall, mechanical irrigation applications, and crop water use. How important is crop water use? Our seed corn companies are spending millions of dollars a day to genetically change the seed that you're planting. You think that it changes the way it works in water? Absolutely. So when we apply water, we want to make sure we're putting it on at the right time, in the right amount, in the right locations of the field, based upon this. Water holding capacity, the active root zone of the crop. That's an interesting statement. Where's that active root zone? Something that I'm learning a little bit more on every year. And the water needs of the crop. Do I have soybeans out there? Do I have wheat out there? Do I have corn out there? What are the water needs? This is a chart that most of you have seen pretty much everywhere. Very simple, but you'd be surprised how many people don't think about this. The root stage compared to the growth stage and when we irrigate. Something interesting that goes on here. From the time we plant to about 2 weeks before pollination, 96% of our water comes out of the top 12 inches of that root zone. Makes sense, right? That's where the roots are. Plant's growing. It's a new plant. Most of that water is going to come out of that top 12 inches. However, you see this line right here? This is a typical Nebraska pivot and what it's capable of applying on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, excuse me. So, all of a sudden now we go into pollination, 32% of our water needs to come out of a 20-inch root zone. 32% of the crop water needs, on average, will come out of that 20-inch root zone. What happens if we don't have roots there? You're not going to pull up any water. You know? The other thing is, what if we don't have water there? You're not going to pull up water. So what do? Part of what we have to look at is that plant is growing. How do we address that? How do we make sure we have water there if we have center pivot irrigation? And how do we make sure that we don't limit that root to that 20-inch root zone as a bare minimum? I like to get roots clear down here to 40 inches if possible. A lot of it comes into irrigation. A lot of our farmers' guides have a typical approach to irrigation. They will look across the fence, and if the neighbor's turning their pivots on, they turn theirs on. If the neighbor's running, I should be running. That's not always the best idea. Because if the neighbor's running, he might have a little bit taller corn. He might actually need to irrigate because he didn't run as hard last year. Who knows? Problem is, our farmers don't want to guess wrong because running too short on water, we can see that. We know that that causes yield loss. We know we're not going to take that risk. The penalty for guessing wrong is too expensive. So Crop Metrics has actually created a systems approach, putting a gauge in that field so you can manage the root zone water for our plants. This is our moisture probe. This is just the first part of a systems approach. We plant our probe between two good healthy plants. Try to get in there about 2 leaf stage when we drop that probe in the ground. And this is what we're looking for, guys. This is actually a mid-July graph. We call it the sum graph. We take all of our sensors, put them together in one graph, interpolate it into inches so we can understand how much the plant is actually using. And then we identify when is our plant using water and how much is it using. That's interesting. All of these stair steps indicate nighttime and daytime activity. When the sun goes down, what should the plant do? Shut down, right? Plant should shut down at night. When that plant shuts down, that line should level off at night. If we have a graph that continues to drop our soil water content at night, we are leaching water somewhere. That needs to level off at night. Then during the day, when that plant opens up, starts photosynthesizing again, and things go active, that plant's going to pull in nutrients, it's going to pull in water, and that total water content is going to drop. Okay? So that level stair step, nighttime activity, that daytime activity should be drawing water out. Our sensors are read every 30 minutes throughout the daytime, and then it's interpolated into this data. This red line becomes our refill point. We want to show our growers, hey, you don't want to run empty, you don't want to run out, but you want to refill. When is the time to refill?
So what
So we
sensor
show the
are you
growers how to
using?
do that.
What sensor are you using?
We're using a Centec probe as our primary probe.
Have you compared them across different types of practices? Till, no-till, conventional?
Yeah.
What did you observe?
We have a terrible time getting 30-inch water conventional till. That's amazing, guys. No-till water, no-till field, you can get water a lot deeper easier. It's amazing. Now, I've done some water prescriptions, do special water prescriptions to address the runoff. And I put some probes actually in the strip of the strip till. I expected what I seen there. But it's amazing what you see between the center of the row and the middle of the row in the strip till. You know, we need to be getting a little better on that. But there's a lot of interesting information that you can find here. The reason we use the Centec probe, it measures the movement of salts in the soil. Okay? It measures the movement of salts in the soil. So, one of the major nutrients that moves with water is nitrogen. Okay? Nitrogen leaching is an issue. Some parts of the country, a lot more than others. With this probe, identifying the active root zone, that active root zone is going to take up most of the water. If it's pulling in most of the water, it's probably going to pull in a little more nitrogen there also. So how do we identify the active root zone? Anybody out in this part of the country fertigate? They spoon feed their fertilizer on through the pivot? Yeah? Where do you place that? Some guys like, I call it turn and burn. The turn and burn approach. You turn your pivot too fast, you burn your crop. That's really what happens. But some guys will turn and burn their fertilizer on. Turn it on real fast, get the fertilizer right on top, and then they slow their pivot down, water it in. Is that the best approach? Maybe, maybe not. It's something that we need to identify by identifying the active root zone for that particular genetic. And population spacing, everything else comes into play with that. But you can see here on this graph, our active root zone is a 20-inch root zone. This graph here is our salinity graph, measuring the movements of our salts. You'll notice that prior to this red box, everything correlates here. Prior to this red boxed area, you'll see there wasn't a whole lot of activity at 20 inches. When that plant became active at 20, you'll see how close those lines are between our 12-inch line and our 20-inch sensor, 12-inch sensor and 20. Look how wide it is towards the end of the season. We used a lot of nitrogen out of that 20-inch root zone. Why? We used a lot of water out of it. So all we're measuring, guys, in this salt sensor is a salinity sensor is something that we're learning on every year. Heavy textured soils with high CECs, it's hard to identify what's going on in there. A sandy soil, very simple to watch those movements of those salts. So we're learning how to use this. But something like this, the salts and the nitrogen, I'm saying probably a pretty good chance that it was. Okay? Can we help to manage our nitrogen and leaching? I think we're going to get better at it. We're going to get better at it, especially under fertigation. That makes sense, guys? Agronomics applied VRI. Anybody heard of VRI? Variable rate irrigation? Everybody's talking about it, right? Yep. A lot of people are talking about it. You go to any pivot manufacturer in the country and they will put together a VRI program for you. Anybody will do it. However, CropMetrics is the only one that will give you an agronomics applied VRI program. And here's why. Our data specialist, Terry, and our team of data specialists around the country, they will take into account that water holding capacity variability. We train them on how to look at these maps, identify that variability, confirm it with the grower that this is lighter textured soil and heavier textured soil. The grower still confirms that the maps are right. But we start identifying what is the extent of change in that water holding capacity. How much change do we have out there? What about the different crops? Do we have corn? We have soybeans? Wheat? What are we looking at? Hybrids and genetics. That's a big one. Big one. I've seen a lot of fields. Have you guys ever planted a crop or heard of someone planting a crop and it's the same hybrid planted one day apart, 2 miles difference, and have a 30, 40 bushel difference at the end of harvest? Absolutely. And I can show you data after data after data. You plant the wrong seed in the wrong soil and you get an inversion. You've got a lot of that data that you can look at. Runoff management, that's a big one. Fertigation solutions. I've actually done a lot of different things with fertigation, especially in sandy soil. It's amazing what you can do with a little nitrogen in the right place in a real sandy soil. Root zone water management, this is what it's all about. Allocations, rotation timing, where do we get the pivot at the right time to make sure we're not burning the crop, overwatering. Pre-water solutions, that's spooky. Southwest Kansas, yeah, a little bit of that going on down there. Pre-water, I've learned a lot from those guys. Nutrient optimization, that's what it's all about. Water changes the uptake of nutrients into those plants. Optimized water, optimized uptake. Water holding capacity, what's going on out there? I don't know if this animation will work. Hey, it will. This is what happens underneath a typical center pivot. A farmer will go out and start that pivot because there is something out there in that field that is going to dry up. There's an area in that field that is going to show water stress sooner than another area. You always turn on the pivot to address that specific area. But under flat rate irrigation, if you are watering to this area here, this being down in the bottom of the field, maybe a little more protected from the wind, anything else that happens throughout the season, this area here, most generally, will overwater. We overwater in the heavier textured soils. I've had guys argue with me on that, so I ask them where their pivot gets stuck. Huh? Is it wet when you drive out there, or when you walk out there and dig it out? Oh yeah, it's wet. Really? Let's think about that for a minute. What are we doing when we identify water holding capacity? Very first thing we do after we get one of Terry's maps in, we go in and we break it up into pie slices. Why pie slices? Because you water in a circle. Doesn't do us any good to break it up in grids. We need to know what that pivot is going to do. Okay? So we break a pivot up right out of the gate into 60 different sectors. Break it into 60 different sectors, identify within each sector what is the variation of change in water holding capacity. Big difference from here to here. Big difference. What about this area right here? I've had a lot of growers walk away from me and say, I'm not going to run VRI speed control, just controlling the speed of that pivot. I'm not going to do that because, look here, we've got heavy soil, average soil, light soil, all in the same place. I've had guys tell me they're not going to do it because of that. Really? The only reason you know that is because I took and put this map together for you. When I take the lines away, the data is still there. That bad spot's still there. So when your pivot's sitting there, what's the right amount of water to put on? What's the right amount of water to apply? No grower can really answer that. They don't know. Our software is designed to look at that sector and look at the majority areas under the center pivot. 50% of your acres are under the last 3 towers. Should that come into play as to how much water you apply? Probably. So our software helps us determine, based on our average base rate, should we apply more than our average or less than our average? Software helps us determine that. So we can still accurately apply in an area like that.
So if your dynamic soil properties change drastically, the software may not work. You'll have to tweak your software.
You're going to have to tweak it.
That's the key. It won't work. You have to tweak it.
Yep. That's the key. Every prescription, every field is different. Every grower is different. Grower habits are different. I have never built exactly the same approach to a VRI prescription on any field. We always have to adjust it. Think about it this way. This map right here would be a map generated for that field. Why would I have to adjust this? What's the extent of variability in water holding capacity? That's what we need to understand. I've had guys ask me, why is water holding capacity different. I mean, you got ET. If your ET's at 30 hundredths of an inch, and it should be, 30 hundredths. Well, I understand that. But, in a sense, if you are overwatering here, and you overwater every single time the pivot goes around, what happens to the root zone under heavy, heavy application of water? You go in and you saturate that ground, you have no aeration in that soil, and that plant just kind of shuts down, sits there, stalls out. If it stalls out for 8 or 10 hours, you basically lost the entire day. So now you're one day quicker getting back there to a place that's already too wet. Okay? So, but identifying extent of variability, if we have an extra 1.5 inches of water holding capacity here than we do up here, then let's take about 10, 12 hundredths of an inch of water out of here, and let's move it up there. After you've made 10 rotations, you've moved 1 inch, 20, 1.5 inches of water. How much of a difference does that make? Guys, it makes all the difference in the world.
So how detailed can you get? I mean, because you're talking that size, if that's 120 acres, that little pie could be 30, 40 acres. How down to the minutia can you take it down to make it variable, in other words?
Are you saying per slice or per
Yeah,
acre?
per slice. What you're telling me is you can take it down to a pretty much small slice.
Oh yeah. I can go clear down to a 1 degree slice.
So you're using a variable frequency pump to control it back and forth?
No, all we're doing is controlling the speed of the pivot.
So you slow down the pivot. And so you don't have to impact GPM.
Nope, not at this point in time. If you go to a zone control where you're shutting sprinklers off, okay, and then you have to think about frequency drive on the well. All we're doing, the pivot's running full speed. All we're doing is adjusting the speed of that pivot, speeding it up, slowing it down. Through here, we will speed that pivot up just a little bit. Right through here. Speed it up just a little bit, we're going to slow it down a little bit right there. That's all we're doing. I'm going to share with you a little secret about zone control. Every pivot company out here wants to sell zone control, guys. There's nothing wrong with zone control, except for this. The only thing that we can do today with zone control irrigation is shut off water. We can't redistribute it anywhere else in the field. We have to shut it off. Now when you're in a drought and your pivot can't keep up anyway, anybody real excited about shutting off your sprinklers? For the last 3 years, I've worked with 7 different zone control pivots. And by the 15th of July each year, we've had to shut them off when we go back to speed control under full water. We just aren't there yet with the technology on the zone. We're close. I'm working with a company out of New Zealand that actually has the potential of moving that water somewhere else in the pivot. That will actually allow us to get that pivot around faster.
So how do they do that? Where the pipe, is the pipe different inside the pipes?
No,
They have
it's
multi-pipe?
staying in the pipe, but we're using just the sprinkler technology, reading from one sprinkler to the next.
Okay, got sensors,
Yep.
valves.
Yep, and we'll probably end up with a double sprinkler package so that we can open up a second valve to redistribute that water somewhere else. You have to be careful with that because runoff's still a problem. So we got to be careful how you build those. But if we can redistribute water, zone control has a lot of potential, except for the fact that it's still about a $30,000 option on one pivot. Zone control is very expensive, and each one of those valves will last about 8,000 hits. So then you start replacing things, it gets very expensive. And that technology too will improve.
Would it be easier to make the soil more homogeneous in its hair qualities and dynamic qualities instead of trying
That's my take on it.
to, yeah,
How important is it placing the probe in the right place in the field? Been a lot of moisture probes go in the ground. How important is placement of that probe? Guys, it's huge. We teach our data specialists how to find the right place in a 130-acre field to put 1 2-inch probe to schedule irrigation from all season. You realize how nuts that is? I thought about that one day. 2-inch probe that I'm going to place in the field for the whole season. I'm going to schedule all of my water off of 1 probe. Wow. If I'm wrong, what does that mean? Identifying that the changes in water holding capacity, slope, everything comes into play when we drop that probe in the ground. What's going to happen to that probe when the rain falls? Are we going to end up with water sitting around that probe giving us a false reading? Are we going to have water running past that probe, not absorbing into the ground? Well, that probe placement is huge. So our software helps us identify based on landscape change, gives us an area of the zero plane in the field, that equal distance from high point to low point. We want to find that zero plane in the field. Also on soil textural changes, it shows us that average soil in that field. Big deal there. Then it will combine those two layers together, take a 130-acre field, drop it down to about 12 acres to place a probe. We're getting better. We still have two other variables though. We got slope to think about, and we've got water applied. Under speed control irrigation, we can't be perfect in every pie slice. So I have to think about that probe being an average soil, average topography, average applied rate of water. I want to find a green sector to place that probe in. So I can take a 130-acre field, reduce it down to an area of about, half an acre to choose to put my probe in. I call it a precision probe placement. We're going to try to go back to that same area every year. The capacitance probes that we use are a dry set direct fit probe. So we don't dig it up, we don't put a slurry in, we do a dry set direct fit. So as we go down through the different soil textural changes, we're going down dry against those changes in soil texture. We want to make sure we go back to that same general area every year. So we're measuring that consistently. We also want to make sure our agronomists have in their hands the location of our heaviest soil and our lightest soil in the field. That way they can help us adjust our water prescriptions throughout the season if need be. If it starts getting real dry, guys, we may have to actually invert that prescription based on where our highest productivity soils are. Seen some of that happen in Kansas this last year.
Could you back up a little? So you put it on you took the average, you took your lightest, you took your heavy.
Yeah, this is actually where we put an electronic probe. This is where we would schedule irrigation from. Schedule our irrigation from this point. Our agronomist then, or we might put a lower cost probe into these areas to make sure that our VRI, our variable rate irrigation water, is correct. But this next field here, this is a 30-30 trial, and guys, I'm about out of time. I'll run through this real quick. This example here is a flat field. It's as level as this floor. Not perfect, but close. Nice flat field. Dark soil. This was a conventional tilled field until we got a hold of him about 3 years ago. So, but this field, farmer says there's no variability. I said, perfect, let's map that field. This is our field that we mapped. Heavy soils, light soils. Not a lot of variability. You cannot see it with the naked eye. But we run a 30-30 trial, which is one of these. 30 degrees of flat rate irrigation, 30 degrees of just speed control variable rate irrigation, 30 degrees of flat all the way around that field. This was our prescription. There's not a lot of variation in it, guys. Just on this area and that area. Not a lot of variation. This was our yield map. See that pie slice right there? I started finding that satellite imagery in July. The grower wanted to fix it, and I wouldn't let him because it's a test, doggone it. But we started seeing that pie slice in July. I put 5 probes in this field. Two in the heavy soil, where we were backing off a little water. I put 1 in the flat rate, 1 in the variable rate. Same in our light soil, put 1 in variable rate, 1 in flat rate. Then the grower had his probe placed right up here to schedule from. So that's where the probes went. Heavy soil, our heaviest soil, where we have a tendency to overwater. Under flat rate irrigation, guys, we put water with each irrigation event to 32 inches. If we're pushing water every irrigation event to 32 inches, that's past our root zone. What else is going with it? Yep. Where we backed off our water, we placed it off 16 inches. That's where we penetrated water to, 16 inches. So our nitrogen, everything stayed in the 16-inch root zone. How much water did it take to do that? 0.08 of an inch with every rotation. The difference in this to that, 0.08 of an inch. With every rotation, at the end of 10 rotations on July 16th, after about 10 rotations, we've only moved 0.80 of an inch of water. Keep it in the root zone though. That's where we want to put it. Okay? Doesn't take a big change, just takes time. What about this area, that light textured soil? That's what dries out first. Topsoil gets dry first in your lighter textured soils, right? After a 4-day rotation, we're only putting water into about 4 to 8 inches. Just couldn't penetrate it any deeper. 4 to 8 inches on a 4-day rotation. We increased the water applied about 0.10 of an inch in that light textured soil, placed our water penetration to 16 inches. Water, soil, 16 inches. Just kept that topsoil just a little bit more optimized with moisture content, and we were able to penetrate water consistently to 16 inches. What made me, I was going through a probe training one day and I'd seen this thing 100 times, and it hit me like a brick how important it is to place that probe in the right place in the field. Because if I'm off, I could be overwatering that way. This is our results. Our light textured soils, those are the 2 zones of light texture. We have a 5 and 9 bushel increase benefit to BRI. Heavy textured soil in the state of Nebraska, that's our heaviest soil, 15 bushel improvement by backing water off. I showed that to one guy and he says, so you're telling me that I'm spending more money to put on more water that I don't need to get less yield? I said, perfect. That's exactly right. This field here I've been working on for a long time. Great grower, very aggressive grower. And this is drip irrigation over here. This is center pivot. Our field average, including the dryland corners, 292. Cornfield, flat ground, very good ground, highly productivity ground. We approached it with different yield goals for every zone in this field. We applied water differently. Under that center pivot, we had a 302 field average under that center pivot.
Conventional no-till strip.
This is actually corn bean rotation. It's 2 years corn, 1 beans.
Tillage?
No tillage.
No-till.
No tillage. He might be strip tilling now, but I don't think so. But that's what we did here, guys. Long-term approach. We've been 3 to 4 years working on this. Last year we did it. We had great heat units. We had everything work together last year. The interesting thing on this field, the right amount of water, 0.90 of an inch. We were shooting for a base rate of 1 inch, backing off 0.10 of an inch. 304.84 is our field high out of 12 different water rate zones. Where we applied a little more water, we maintained our 300 bushel average, but it took more water to get there. We moved that water from one area to the other. It's not about more water, more yields. Nope. Optimized soil moisture content equals more yields. That's what it takes. So I'll slip through this real quick, guys. We're about done. This field here was overwatered real bad down in this area, little 4-tower pivot. This guy put it on there because he was getting his pivot stuck. We made it, it's 260 bushel improvement our very first year, $7 corn. Well, we don't have that right now, but there was 20% water savings in 9 acres. Most important to this grower, the pivot did not get stuck. I went down to Nappy Farms down in New Mexico. We put 15 water prescriptions together for Nappy, all because their pivots didn't get stuck. 10 of those 15 pivots topped the farming yield by watering right. So guys, watering properly makes all the difference in the world. This was another 30-30 trial with 8 different hybrids through it. These 8 hybrids, every one responded positively to variable rate irrigation, because all we're doing, guys, is optimizing the water content, optimizing nutrient flow. That's really all we do. The crop metrics advantage, what sets us apart from everybody else out here in the industry? It's Terry Saffer. Our PDS network is what sets us apart. There is no region of the world, guys, that is exactly the same. The way you guys farm out here is a lot different than I do in Broken Bow, Nebraska. So it's important that we have local agronomy support to put together an attainable, repeatable, sustainable solution for your farm. That's what we have to do. Crop metrics, great technology. Our software is like none other. I'll put my software up against anybody's software when it comes to writing prescriptions. But this foundation is right here. All this technology will fall flat on the ground if you don't have agronomy support, working with people like you and everybody else out here in this industry to put together the right programs for those producers. These producers are masters at collecting data. What do you do with it? How do you help them understand it better? How do you help show them better ways to improve their situation? More than just technology, guys. We don't want to just throw variable rate out there. We want to bring a true, precise program to these farms. That's going to include all aspects of it. Seed, food, cover, water, everything comes together to benefit our growers. So, we went through that kind of fast, and I still took too much time. Sorry.
That's all right. You be here tomorrow, Kylan, or?
Actually, I'm going to have to fly. I've got to run tonight, right as soon as we're done here. So,
Let's give these guys a round of applause. We'll take just a few minutes. If you guys want to forum and ask some questions, go ahead. We'll be back in about 5 minutes. That'd be enough? Let's say 3:30. We'll be back, okay?
There's going to be a Walsh here. Then what, next week or the week after?
actually, just towards the end of this week.
Towards the end of this week? I got as far as sending an email out.
No,
Wheels gives
the dry land.
Oh, it's up there, just south of Coder. Bex. I've been down where they put all that. We've all seen right behind us.
Irrigation
And like shoes didn't get muddy. I mean, I thought I was going to have to wait.
I was thinking,
But because of the structure of the soil.
We drove down there.
The soil structure is what, that's what we'd like to do.
it's a short grass prairie. Some that's for horses.
Yeah. This is very.
Actually, that's where some of the girls have been 42,000. We've been pushing population very hard. Yes, there's a lot that goes into it.
That's west. How about east?
Hello, our average.
That's why on the data side, I get my growers to start testing with the tools that we have in our software. Our growers actually test their growers. They put their own timers in their leg and their seed and they feed them through divers just test them. So they feel like they're at least a year.
Yes.